Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking what has got to be one of the most fascinating scientific narratives in modern medicine right now. We're talking about the intense neuroscience and the equally intense regulatory battle surrounding MDMA. This is a molecule that is just wrapped in a massive paradox. It's been heavily stigmatized by its history, yet it's standing right on the edge of being a true psychiatric breakthrough for post-traumatic stress disorder. So, let's dive right in with a pretty staggering question. How exactly did a chemical, one synthesized over a century ago and known mostly for fueling global dance clubs, nearly revolutionize the treatment of severe PTSD? I mean, it's a wild arc, right? From a dusty laboratory to the nightclub scene, and then straight to the precipice of FDA approval. To make sense of this whole journey, we really need to look closely at what this molecule actually does to the human brain.
Section 1. A different kind of drug. The empathogen. To really grasp the recent clinical trials, we first have to completely separate this molecule from how we typically view psychedelics. Usually we think of drugs that distort perception or ones that dissolve your sense of self, but MDMA is fundamentally different. It's actually classified as an empathogen. That term was coined back in 1986 by chemist David Nichols, and it perfectly captures how the drug shifts your emotional weather rather than radically changing your reality. It produces this profound emotional openness, a deep sense of safety, and interpersonal closeness, completely without those strong hallucinations. The contrast here is absolutely stark. Classic psychedelics, think LSD or psilocybin, they work by activating a very specific receptor, the 5-HT2A receptor, which leads to those distorted realities and hallucinations. MDMA, on the other hand, maintains patient lucidity. People stay completely oriented, they know exactly where they are, they know exactly who they are talking to. What changes is that their defensiveness entirely drops, and that unlocks an immense amount of trust.
Now, the timeline of this drug is, well, it's truly bizarre. Merck actually first synthesized MDMA way back in 1912 as this totally forgotten chemical intermediate. Decades go by, and it leaks into the 1980s nightclub scene, which prompts the DEA to hit it with a Schedule I ban in 1985. But the real shocker came in 2002. A high-profile study claimed a single recreational dose caused severe primate brain damage, and that shaped a whole generation of fear. The incredible twist here? Literally a year later, that study was fully retracted because researchers realized they accidentally gave the animals mislabeled methamphetamine. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Fast forward through decades of researchers trying to bring it back to the clinic, leading us all the way to August 2024 when the FDA ultimately rejected its use for PTSD.
Moving on to Section 2. Serotonin in reverse, the mechanism.
So, to understand how this got so close to FDA approval, we have to look at the cellular level, because what's happening here is essentially a mechanical hijack. Standard antidepressants, like your typical SSRIs, they work by blocking the serotonin transporter to just slow down the reuptake of serotonin. But MDMA is what's called a releaser. First, it gets carried directly into the neuron. Second, it literally forces that transporter pump to run backwards. As a result, it pumps stored serotonin out into the synapse in an absolute flood, right alongside dopamine and oxytocin.
Which brings us to Section 3. Rewiring fear and building trust.
So what does all that surging serotonin and oxytocin actually do inside the mind? Well, brain imaging shows us something pretty remarkable. MDMA effectively turns down the volume on the amygdala, which is the brain's primary threat detector. In controlled fMRI studies, the amygdala's response to angry, threatening faces actually drops, while the brain's response to positive social cues spikes. Imagine living with severe trauma. By dampening that fear response and raising oxytocin, which is the hormone of bonding, MDMA creates a profound sense of safety. It allows people to approach their worst, most terrifying autobiographical memories without being paralyzed by panic. But beyond just quieting fear, there is this incredible neuroplasticity angle centered around what's called the critical period. So this is a developmental window in the brain. It's typically only open during our youth, and it's when we are exquisitely tuned to learn from social experiences. Once we grow up, that window seals shut. But in an astonishing 2019 study published in Nature, mice given a single dose of MDMA actually had this childhood window reopened. Now, yes, this is an animal model, and human translation is still a hypothesis, but it hints at exactly how deeply entrenched trauma might be unlearned. It suggests the brain could temporarily revert to a state where it can absorb new, safe associations. All right, Section 4. PTSD trials. Breakthrough on the brink.
Let's move over to the clinical trials to see how this built up into an unprecedented moment for patients who had basically exhausted all other options. In a major phase 3 confirmatory trial run by MAPS and Lykos, the results were just staggering. 71%. That is 71% of participants with moderate to severe PTSD who no longer met the diagnostic criteria for the disorder after undergoing MDMA-assisted therapy. Furthermore, 46% achieved full remission. And keep in mind, this is a population where many of these patients have failed every single existing treatment out there.
So how exactly did they achieve this? Well, the therapy relies on a really specific combination. The drug is administered just a few times, but it's done inside an intensive course of psychotherapy. MDMA quiets the amygdala's alarm system, while that oxytocin surge fuels deep trust in the therapist. This creates a tolerable window for the patient to actually revisit their trauma. Because they aren't totally overwhelmed by fear, the brain engages in what's known as fear extinction learning. It allows for memory reconsolidation, meaning patients literally re-encode their worst memories without all that paralyzing emotional weight attached to them.
And that leads us to Section 5, FDA rejection, why they said no. Yet despite those staggering numbers and all that elegant neuroscience, the momentum just completely stalled. In August 2024, the FDA halted approval, highlighting the ultimate paradox of this drug. On one hand, you've got undeniable clinical efficacy, right? High remission rates and statistical significance over placebo for a really severe population. But on the other hand, the FDA had some massive concerns about the trial itself. Because MDMA's effects are just so obvious, 90% of participants correctly guessed if they got the drug or a placebo. This functional unblinding really worried the FDA that expectation might have inflated the results. Add to that some allegations of therapist misconduct, data integrity worries, and honestly, just the FDA's general unfamiliarity with evaluating a drug coupled with intense therapy. The crucial takeaway here, the FDA didn't reject the neuroscience of the brain. They objectively rejected the structure and the integrity of the clinical trials themselves.
MDMA is basically a molecule that acts like a mechanical key to some of our most complex human emotions. It has already taught neuroscience a profound lesson about exactly how trust, fear, and memory are wired into the human brain, and how, just for a brief window, they can actually be carefully rewired. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a pretty major lingering question. Will this incredibly unique tool for human connection ever successfully navigate our rigid regulatory standards to reach the patients who need it most? Or is it destined to remain an unapproved paradox forever? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with us, and as always, keep questioning the science behind the headlines.